New York City just spent $2.5 billion per mile to build the first phase of the 2nd Avenue subway. Let that satisfy your brain for a second. $2.5 billion per mile. That's not the whole line. That's not even a significant chunk of it. That's roughly 1.8 miles, about 12 blocks of tunnel and track underneath Manhattan's Upper East Side. And the second phase, now underway, is coming in even higher. Now fly 5,700 kilometers across the Atlantic to Madrid. There, the Spanish capital expanded its metro system by 56 kilometers, built dozens of brand new stations, and did the whole thing in about 4 years in the late 1990s. The cost? Around $50 to $80 million per mile adjusted, roughly $40 to $50 million per kilometer. That means New York spent up to 30 to 40 times what Madrid did per mile of subway. And here's the thing, this isn't a one-off. It isn't an outlier. It's not some freak accounting error unique to Manhattan. This pattern is everywhere. The United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, Australia. The richest, most technologically advanced nations on the planet now take 3 to 5 times longer and spend 5 to 10 times more, on average according to international databases, to build infrastructure than countries like South Korea, China, or Spain. This is the meta question lurking behind every stalled Western megaproject you've heard of. Behind HS2, behind California high-speed rail, behind every cost overrun headline and every delayed opening date. The world's richest countries have forgotten how to build. Let's start in the United Kingdom with HS2, the high-speed rail line that was supposed to revolutionize travel between London and the north of England. When the project was first proposed, the idea was simple: connect London to Birmingham, then extend onwards to Manchester and Leeds, slashing journey times and rebalancing the country's London-centric economy. The original budget? Around £37.5 billion. That was 2012. Fast forward to 2025, and HS2 has already spent over £40 billion, with contracts that were originally priced at £19.5 billion ballooning to £26 billion and beyond. The project is just over halfway done. The northern leg to Manchester has been scrapped entirely. The line to Leeds? Gone. What remains is a truncated Phase 1 route that may not even reach central London's Euston Station in its initial phase. Delays have pushed completion beyond 2033. A recent review found that major contracts were signed in 2020 before designs were mature and before planning consents were in place. That's like buying a house before it has blueprints and then acting surprised when the builder comes back asking for more money. HS2's cost per mile now sits at approximately 300 to 400 million pounds. Comparable European high-speed rail projects? Around 30 to 50 million pounds per mile. That's a factor of roughly 8 to 10. Now cross the Atlantic to California, where an equally ambitious and equally troubled project has been grinding forward since 2008. California high-speed rail was supposed to connect San Francisco to Los Angeles in under 3 hours, offering an alternative to the state's congested highways and short-haul flights. The initial estimate was $33 billion. By 2026, the cost for just the initial operating segment, a 171-mile stretch through the Central Valley, connecting cities most people haven't heard of, had ballooned to around $35 billion on its own. The total Phase 1 project cost is now projected to reach $90 to $128 billion, and no trains are running. An audit uncovered $600 million in cost overruns caused by poor planning and contract mismanagement on early construction packages alone. The Federal Railroad Administration has historically raised serious concerns about whether the project has a viable path to deliver even a partial system. And California isn't building through the Himalayas. It's building through flat agricultural land in the San Joaquin Valley. These aren't isolated failures. They're symptoms of something systemic. So what exactly is going on? Why can Madrid build 35 miles of metro with dozens of stations in 4 years, while New York spends $2 billion on a 1.2-mile extension with 2 stations. The answers are uncomfortable because they don't point to a single villain. There's no one regulation to repeal, no one union to blame, no one politician to vote out. The problem is structural, institutional, and deeply embedded in how wealthy Western democracies now approach construction. Let's start with governance. Madrid's metro expansion in the late 1990s succeeded because of strong, centralized political leadership, streamlined decision-making, and a willingness to use standardized, repeatable construction methods. The city didn't reinvent the wheel with every station. It used standardized designs, standardized tunnel boring approaches, and moved fast. The political leadership committed to the project and held the timeline. Compare that to HS2, where successive prime ministers and transport secretaries have each reshaped the project's scope, ambition, and political justification. The line's route has been altered, stations have been redesigned, entire legs have been cancelled and then partially reinstated. Every change cascades through the supply chain, inflating costs and extending timelines. As one analysis noted, HS2's problems stem from a top-down vision for exceptional speed that undermined cost control, leading to what's known in the industry as gold plating, specifying the most expensive possible solution for every element. Then there's procurement. In the United States, infrastructure projects are plagued by fragmented governance. There's no centralized system for learning from past projects. New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority doesn't systematically study how Seoul builds metro lines at $120 to $160 million per kilometer. There's no institutional memory being built, no benchmarking database that forces agencies to justify why their per kilometer costs are 10 or 20 times higher than comparable cities. Each project is treated as unique. Custom designs, bespoke engineering solutions, one-off contracts. And every custom element costs more than a standardized one. Here's something most people don't think about. When you hear a mega project costs $10 billion, you probably imagine most of that going to concrete, steel, tunnel boring machines, and workers. The physical stuff. The hard costs. But in Manhattan, soft costs, design, planning, insurance, legal fees, project management, consultant fees, and contingencies can reach 21% of total project costs. In smaller cities, that figure drops to 7 or 8%. That's not a minor difference. On a $10 billion project, it's the difference between $700 million and $2.1 billion in overhead before a single shovel hits the ground. And it's getting worse. Permitting and environmental review processes in the United States can add years to project timelines. The National Environmental Policy Act, originally designed to protect communities from harmful development, now functions as a tool that any opposition group can use to delay virtually any project indefinitely. Lawsuits, injunctions, supplemental environmental impact statements, each one adds months or years and millions or billions in costs. In the UK, the planning system creates similar bottlenecks. HS2's contracts were signed before planning consents were ready. That's not a technical problem. That's an institutional dysfunction so fundamental, it's almost hard to believe. Labor practices compound the issue further. Studies have identified overstaffing and inefficient work rules as significant cost drivers in Western construction. In New York, trade union agreements and legacy work practices mean that subway tunneling projects often employ far more workers per tunnel boring machine than comparable projects in Europe or Asia. The workers aren't the problem. The system that deploys them inefficiently is. It's worth pausing here to acknowledge something important. This isn't inevitable. This isn't what building infrastructure has to look like. Other wealthy, democratic nations manage to build things on time and on budget. South Korea's Seoul metro system continues to expand at $120 to $160 million per kilometer. That's a fraction of what New York, London, or Toronto spend. Canada's Ontario line in Toronto is coming in at approximately $735 million per kilometer, nearly 5 times what Seoul pays. Spain built its entire high-speed rail network, the second longest in the world after China, efficiently, and at costs that make HS2 look absurd. France's Grand Paris Express, while not cheap at $250 to $300 million per kilometer, still comes in at roughly half the cost of London's Crossrail, which ran between $500 and $750 million per kilometer. Even within Europe, the disparities are stark. UK motorway bridges cost more than 3 times as much per mile as those in France, Denmark, or Norway. Building in Britain is 6 times costlier than in South Korea and more than twice that of France. China, for all the caveats about labor standards and governance, builds at a pace and cost that is dramatically lower than Western equivalents. The country has more high-speed rail than anywhere else on the planet, more bridges, and more dams. It doesn't treat every project as a unique snowflake. It standardizes, repeats, and learns. And that learning part is critical. Madrid succeeded not just because of political will, but because it built repetition into its approach. When you build dozens of stations using the same basic template, your 20th station is faster and cheaper than your first. When every project is custom, you never climb that learning curve. Some counterarguments deserve acknowledgement. Higher costs in the West do partly reflect genuinely higher labor standards, stronger environmental protections, greater geological complexity in some cases, and more rigorous safety regulations. Not every dollar of cost premium is waste. But even after accounting for higher standards, when you're spending 20 to 40 times more per mile than Madrid for comparable subway construction, labor standards don't explain the gap. When HS2 costs 8 to 10 times more per mile than European high-speed rail, built to similar safety standards, regulations aren't the full story. The solutions aren't mysterious. They're just politically difficult. Centralized benchmarking systems that force transit agencies to justify their costs against international comparisons. Standardized designs that allow institutional learning across projects. Streamlined procurement that doesn't treat every rail station as a bespoke architectural commission. Political commitments that survive election cycles. And a willingness to study, genuinely study, how South Korea, Spain, and others deliver infrastructure at a fraction of Western costs. The UK recently appointed Mike Brown, the former Transport for London Commissioner, as the new chair of HS2 Ltd in an attempt to reset the project's cost and schedule credibility. Whether that institutional shakeup translates to real savings remains to be seen. Here's what keeps me up at night about all of this. Every $1 billion wasted on a mega project isn't just money gone. It's a hospital that wasn't built. It's a school that wasn't funded. It's a transit line that was proposed, rejected as too expensive, and never constructed, leaving millions of people stuck in traffic, burning fuel, losing hours of their lives. When California spends $90 billion or more on a high-speed rail line that may never carry a passenger, that's not just a construction failure. It's a failure of governance that erodes public trust in the very idea that government can deliver anything at all. When HS2 gets cut in half and still costs more than the entire original budget, it teaches a generation of citizens that ambition is foolish, that infrastructure is impossible, that decline is inevitable. But it isn't inevitable. The engineering knowledge exists. The technology exists. The construction workforce exists. What's broken is the system around them. The procurement, the governance, the political courage, the institutional learning. Countries like South Korea and Spain haven't discovered some secret formula. They've simply maintained something that the world's richest nations have allowed to decay: the basic institutional capacity to take a plan, execute it efficiently, and deliver results. The richest countries on Earth aren't failing because they can't build. They're failing because they've built systems that make building nearly impossible. And until those systems are confronted honestly, every future megaproject will follow the same trajectory: over budget, over schedule, and under-delivering on the promises that justified it in the first place. The construction industry is capable of extraordinary things. We've seen bridges built across Himalayan canyons and dams raised in earthquake zones. The question isn't whether humans can build anymore. The question is whether the world's wealthiest nations will fix the broken institutions standing between ambition and reality. Thanks for watching Hard Hat Industries, your source for the massive engineering and heavy iron shaping our world. If you appreciate the scale and technical complexity of these builds, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakthrough.